We all love Disney movies. Whether you grew up with the classics or came of age in the digital era, it's hard to find someone out there who doesn't have a Disney favorite. Or 10. But that doesn't mean these movies are perfect. And some details that nobody talks about don't make any sense at all. Mulan is the story of a young girl in China who disguises herself as a man in order to go to war to protect her country. It has become a classic, and Mulan herself is the kind of strong-willed, determined Disney heroine who we could all look up to. But wait, how exactly does she disguise herself again? She just puts her hair in a ponytail, and nobody was the wiser. It might have taken a little bit more than that to convince us, but maybe the rest of the army wasn't so bright after all. Speaking of measly disguises, remember in Aladdin when Jasmine escapes the palace to go wander around the marketplace like a regular person for a while? Sure, she throws some peasant clothes on and tosses a scarf over her head in order to go incognito, but she's still the princess and only daughter of the Sultan. You'd think that somebody might recognize her, especially since she kept her massive gold earrings on, by the way. She could have at least added a fake mustache for good measure. Maybe it's not actually the weak disguises that are the problem. Maybe it's the people of Disney that all collectively need glasses. Like Prince Charming from Cinderella, for example. This man was dancing with Cinderella all night, looking right at her face with his wide open eyeballs. And yet he cannot recognize her until he sees that the shoe fits her foot. We get that she looks a little different without the gown and the updo, but one little detail did stay the same, and that was her entire face. And speaking of Cinderella, we have one more question that has been bugging us since we were about 8 years old and understood shoe shopping. How is it possible that Cinderella is quite literally the only woman in the kingdom with her size of feet? Are they insanely small? While dainty enough, they look pretty average in the movie. And as any average-sized shoe-wearing person could tell you, that's always the size people sell out first, because so many people have them. We always knew that the Disney princesses were admirably strong, but it seems like Belle from Beauty and the Beast might actually possess some actual super strength. After the scene where Beast fends off a pack of wolves from hunting and devouring Belle, he is seriously injured and unconscious. She gets him back to the castle on her horse, but wait, how did she get him up onto that horse? Beast looks like he weighs about as much as her horse does, so she must have some kind of undisclosed superpowers in order to have gotten him up there. 101 Dalmatians sounds like a dream, but in reality, that is a lot of dogs. Even if they're tiny little puppies, how on earth did Roger and Anita house all of them? Literally, inside their house. Sure, it's a big, beautiful townhouse, but again, we say, that is a lot of dogs. We don't even really know what the pair do for a living, aside from the fact that Roger is a struggling songwriter. And aside from housing them, how are they managing to feed all of those dogs? Snow White was the first feature-length Disney animated film, and changed animated movies forever. But there's still one question that has always been on our minds. Why do the Seven Dwarfs all live together in a shack in the woods if they're mining diamonds? Diamonds! And not teeny tiny ones either. Big, giant, dumb old diamonds. They don't appear to have a boss, so as self-made diamond manufacturers, they must be raking in all that good diamond money themselves. So why not buy at least a slightly bigger house? They can all still keep being roommates. There is another Disney-related financial question that we have, but this time it's about the movie Frozen. When we meet the character of Kristoff, we learn that he is an ice salesman, which makes sense early on, we guess. But once Elsa returns, she makes him the official ice master. Wait, so he's still selling ice to the citizens? When she can make it, infinite ice, and for free, infinite free ice. Not only did she plunge their world into winter for prolonged periods, but the second it all melted, it was back to business as usual, apparently. The Toy Story movies are pretty much perfect, except for one detail about Buzz Lightyear that people have always found a little confusing. When we first meet him, Buzz is completely convinced that he is not a toy, so much so that Woody spends a long time trying to convince him of his reality. And yet, whenever a human walks into the room, Buzz does like all the other toys and freezes. Why would he do this if he didn't think he was a toy? I bet you thought we were done with Cinderella, didn't you? Well, nope. We have another bone to pick with this classic movie. From what we understand, once the fairy godmother's spell finishes at midnight, everything magic that surrounds Cinderella will disappear. And it looks like that is true, except for those dang old shoes again. How is it that her shoes don't fade away with the rest of the magic? Maybe it was all part of the fairy godmother's plan, but that is never explained in the movie, and we want answers. Inside Out is one of the most heartwarming, sob-inducing animated movies of late. The movie about a little girl's inner emotional life was not only packed with great voices and an awesome story, but it actually started helping children learn to vocalize things that they weren't able to before. But one thing about it really stuck out is just a bit confusing. Riley's emotions are both male and female, but when it comes to her parents, her dads are all male and her moms are all female. While the remake of Beauty and the Beast was pretty great, you just can't beat the original. The music, story, and animation of the Disney classic is so good it was even nominated for a Best Picture Oscar. And yet, one weird detail sticks out. We know from the movie that the Beast was cursed around age 11, but when the Beast has a fit of rage, he slashes a painting of his former self. Except the guy in that painting is at least 18, so how would they know what he was supposed to look like? While the story of The Little Mermaid is beautifully tragic, and the movie itself is totally delightful, we can't help but wonder, couldn't Ariel have just written Prince Eric a note? Sure, maybe don't lead with the sea witch stole my voice and I love you because I've been creeping on you from afar, but maybe a simple hello could have helped out a bit. We even see her sign the contract from Ursula earlier in the movie, so we know that mermaid can write. We can't get Moana out of our heads, and not just because the music is some of the best out there. It's that everything about the movie is so captivating and unique, and the story couldn't be better. Moana is chosen by the gods to save her people from the terrible fate of starvation, and one of those gods is the ocean. And yet, the ocean seems to be making the task as hard as possible for Moana. Why wouldn't it just help her instead? Toy Story. It's rare that every single one of an already great movie sequels are amazing, and yet somehow Toy Story nailed it every single time. But there's one thing about Woody that we can't quite wrap our heads around. It's established in Toy Story 2 that Woody has actually been around since the TV show in the 1950s, long before he made it to Andy. And yet, despite being over half a century old, he is completely taken aback when Andy starts growing up and growing out of his toys. Did he have no owners before, or suffer from some form of amnesia? Having your child stolen away when they're only a baby like Rapunzel was in the movie Tangled is not something that any parent would be able to get over easily, which is why they hold a ceremony for her every year. But also, it seems like maybe they could have looked a little bit more thoroughly for their missing kid. Yes, she is locked in a tall tower, but did you check inside it? Sure, maybe she isn't in there, but it's a pretty noticeable tower, and what's the harm in checking out that noticeable tower? Monsters, Inc. rules. It's just great, and the fact that it's become such a fan favorite is further proof of that. But something about the timeline left us a little confused. Lucky for us, we got a whole other Mike and Sully movie called Monsters University, and got to see the whole backstory of how they became friends in college. But in Monsters, Inc., Mike tells Sully that he has been jealous of him since the 4th grade. Well, which one is it? Disney princesses have been criticized over the years for their unrealistic beauty standards. And let's face it, that's a fair assessment. With their impossible bodies, giant eyeballs, and long flowing hair, it's a pretty narrow standard for what ideal beauty is. Luckily, they make up for it with a ton of attitude. But there's a standard set by Ariel in The Little Mermaid that is literally impossible to meet, and that is that her hair is never wet. She lives in the water, and yet whenever she steps out of it, boom, perfect blow dry. One more thing about Ariel has always been a little confusing, or not so much confusing as it is a little bit, disturbing. We know that she deliberately avoids eating her buddy Sebastian after he escapes from Prince Eric's kitchen, but her sympathy for her fellow sea creatures seems to stop there. While at the dinner table, she has literally no reaction whatsoever to the massive plate of seafood that Eric has in front of him. Those are your friends, Ariel. Do something. Princess and the Frog was amazing because while it was a modern Disney movie, it feels like a classic. But something about the end has always raised an eyebrow or two. We learn at the end that Tiana and Prince Naveen can become human again only if a princess kisses the Frog Prince before the clock strikes midnight. So Charlotte generously steps up and agrees to do it, right as midnight sounds, which means she isn't a princess anymore. So how is it that she doesn't turn into a frog herself? This is our last entry about Cinderella, we promise. And once again, it's about those silly shoes of hers. First of all, the entire concept of dancing, or even walking around in high heels made of glass, is insanity. But that's not what this is about. How does she manage to lose a shoe on the stairs if they fit so perfectly? Usually when shoes fit, they don't just go flying all off willy-nilly, and yet hers do. Seems like they might be a little loose after all. We all know the story of Tarzan, a baby raised to adulthood in the wild by friendly gorillas, until one day a group of British explorers, including a young woman named Jane, show up, and the time arrives for Tarzan to learn to live amongst his own people. It's an awesome movie, but one thing about Tarzan himself is super confusing. He has an American accent, raised in the wild by animals, taught to speak by British people, and somehow winds up with an American accent. Something doesn't quite add up here. Hercules has everything. Great animation, amazing songs, a hilariously terrifying villain, and of course, a great hero. And yet, when Hades orders Pain and Panic to kill the baby Hercules, which, spoiler, they don't, it's a bit confusing that he never realizes that Herc is still alive. He's the lord of the underworld. He could literally see all the souls of the dead swirling around there below him. Wouldn't he double check that Hercules' soul was there, just for, posterity? Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove is one of the best Disney villains of all time. The ancient, rail-thin, evil genius and her sidekick Kronk are a pair that we could watch until the end of time. But there is one thing about Yzma that is a little bit confusing. How is it that she just takes over Kuzco's throne without even a second thought from anyone else? Yzma just straight up decided that she would be next in line, and everyone else was totally cool with that apparently. In The Lion King, it seems as if the animal kingdom lives in almost perfect harmony. Sure, we see the hyenas chomping on a bone or two, but that's pretty much it. And yet Simba is still a lion, so wouldn't he have gone after Timon and Pumbaa like they were lunch and dinner, rather than befriending them and singing songs? Yes, it's a movie, but there is no way that a teenage lion could possibly eat enough grubs to stay alive. And in his starving state, a warthog must look pretty tasty. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have to go start marathoning all of these Disney classics immediately. What'd you think of this list? Are there any other weird Disney moments that have stuck out to you? Let us know in the comments, and we hope you had fun watching. Don't forget to subscribe to ScreenRant for more great content.